She woke up pressed against him, her face against his chest, his arm locked around her like he'd done it 100 times before. The Hamptons' house was completely silent. Neither of them had moved all night, and when she finally looked up, he was already awake, watching her, saying nothing. Drop your prediction. Do they end up together? Or not? Comment and check back at the end. Hazel Reed had a list. Not a dramatic one, not a bucket list or a vision board or anything that required a font and a frame. Just a plain notes app list on her phone, added to at odd hours when she couldn't sleep. Things she needed to stop doing. Things she needed to start. At the top, underlined twice with the kind of conviction that only comes at 2 a.m. Stop saying yes when you mean no. She'd written that one 8 months ago and had violated it approximately 47 times since, which was probably why she was currently in the passenger seat of her best friend Jenna's car, heading toward the Hamptons for a 2-week family reunion she had politely, firmly, and repeatedly tried to decline, and somehow still agreed to attend. "You're going to love it," Jenna said, not looking at her. "You said that about the pottery class. You broke 1 bowl. I broke 4 bowls and a kiln lid. Jenna. The instructor forgave you. She cried. Jenna laughed and turned onto the highway ramp. Hazel looked out the window at the flat gray stretch of Long Island in early June, the kind of morning that hadn't decided yet whether to be beautiful or bleak. She had taken a half-day off work at the architecture firm, packed a single bag with aggressive minimalism, and told herself it was just 2 weeks. 14 days. She could do anything for 14 days. What she had not been told, not properly, not in a way that gave her time to prepare or manufacture a reasonable excuse, was that Jenna's older brother would be there. Declan Whitmore. She'd met him exactly 3 times in the 6 years she'd been friends with Jenna. The first time, she was 23, and he was heading out the door in a suit, barely sparing her a glance. The second time, he was on a phone call the entire Thanksgiving dinner and ate standing up by the kitchen counter. The third time, 2 years ago now, he had looked at her directly for the first time, said, "You're the architect," and then gotten into a car that cost more than her apartment. That was all she had. 3 data points, each one colder than the last. What she also had, because Jenna mentioned it casually the way people mention the weather, was the knowledge that Declan had just sold his company. His hedge fund, actually. The one he'd built from nothing over 12 years. The one that had made him the kind of wealthy that people in his circles discussed in hushed, impressed tones. Sold it 6 weeks ago. Quietly, with no announcement and no follow-up. Jenna said he'd been strange since, quieter than usual, which for Declan was saying something. Hazel had filed that information away and not thought about it again. She had her own problems. Her firm had just handed her a commission she'd been working toward for 2 years, a residential project in East Hampton, actually, which was partly why she'd eventually said yes to this trip. She could work remotely. She could be useful. She could keep her head down. She was good at keeping her head down. That was the thing nobody asked her about. Not really. Hazel was capable and self-sufficient and genuinely fine, and so nobody ever checked. She was the friend who sorted things out. She was the colleague who stayed late. She was the daughter who called every Sunday and never mentioned that she was tired. Actually, bone-tired in a way that had nothing to do with work and everything to do with the fact that she had been handling things alone for so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like to let someone else carry something. She didn't know how to be the one who needed help. It had never felt safe to find out. The Reed family house, technically Jenna's parents' house, was a gray shingled, wide-porched, genuinely beautiful estate 3 minutes from the beach. Hazel had seen photos. In person, it was the kind of house that made you feel slightly like you'd wandered into a Ralph Lauren campaign, which was either wonderful or exhausting depending on your state of mind. She was somewhere in between. They arrived at 11:30. There were already cars in the drive, Jenna's parents, some cousins, a pair of aunts Hazel had heard about but never met. The air smelled like salt and cut grass. A dog she didn't recognize came sprinting around the corner of the house and stopped dead in front of her, tail going, "That's Biscuit," Jenna said. "He's harmless. He looks judgmental. He's a golden retriever. Golden retrievers can be judgmental." She grabbed her bag from the trunk and followed Jenna up the porch steps, already making quiet plans. She'd set up her laptop in whatever room she was given, put her headphones in by 3, get 2 solid hours on the East Hampton plans before dinner. Structured. Manageable. Fine. She pushed open the screen door, stepped into the cool of the entryway, and walked directly into a wall. Except the wall caught her. 2 hands, large, steady, completely unexpected, closed around her arms before she could stumble backward. She blinked, looked up. Declan Whitmore was taller than she'd remembered, and he was looking at her with an expression she couldn't immediately name. Not cold, exactly, not warm, just very still, the way a person looks when they've been somewhere quiet for a long time and something has just arrived to interrupt it. "Hazel Reed," he said. Not a question. She became aware that his hands were still on her arms. He seemed to notice at the same moment. He let go. "Sorry," she said, which was automatic, which she immediately resented. Behind her, Jenna made a small sound. The kind of sound that, in a court of law, could only be described as delighted. The sound Jenna made was, in fact, the opening note of a catastrophe. Hazel knew this because she knew Jenna, and she knew that sound. It was the same sound Jenna had made 2 years ago when she'd accidentally introduced Hazel to her then ex at a gallery opening. The same sound she'd made when she'd forgotten to mention the dinner party was actually a setup. It was the sound of someone who had arranged something and was now watching it unfold exactly as planned. Hazel turned to look at her. Jenna was examining the ceiling with great interest. The rooms. Hazel said carefully. Yes? How many are there? A pause. A very specific kind of pause. So, Jenna said, "Funny story. It was not a funny story. Or rather, it was funny in the way that things are funny when they are happening to someone else." The house, which Hazel had assumed was large enough to comfortably fit an extended family reunion, was apparently in the middle of a renovation. 2 of the guest rooms were completely unusable. One had no floor, the other had no ceiling, and these were not minor issues. Jenna's parents had taken the master. The aunts had the 2 remaining rooms. The cousins were camping in the garden, which sounded more whimsical than it apparently was, given that 2 of them were already arguing about a tent pole. "There's the pool house," Jenna said. "Great." Hazel said. "Declan was going to take it." Hazel looked at her. "But it has 2 rooms," Jenna added quickly. "Technically. The second one is small, but it has a door. A proper door. With a lock. Jenna. "I genuinely didn't know about the renovation, I promise. Mum forgot to tell me." "You can ask her." Hazel considered her options. She could drive back to the city, but her car was in the shop, and she'd come with Jenna. She could take one of the cousin tents, but she'd heard the tent pole argument escalate to include something about a sleeping bag injustice, and she wasn't built for that. She could sleep on the main house sofa, but she'd seen it. It was one of those artistic sofas, beautiful and completely hostile to human backs. The pool house had a proper door. With a lock. She picked up her bag. Declan was already there when she arrived, which she knew because his bag was on the kitchen counter, and there was a coffee, actual coffee, made in an actual press, which she noted because it smelled extraordinary, sitting on the table by the window. He came out of the larger bedroom just as she stepped through the door, and they looked at each other with the mutual, weary recognition of 2 people who had both just been informed of the same bad news. "Jenna," he said. "Jenna," she agreed. A silence. He looked at her bag, then at her face, then at the second door, the one to the smaller room, and something passed across his expression that she couldn't quite catch before it was gone. "I'll take the smaller one," he said. "You don't have to. I sleep 4 hours a night. Room size is irrelevant." She didn't know what to say to that. It was too bleak to argue with. She said thank you instead, which felt both insufficient and exactly right, and went to put her bag down in the larger room before he could change his mind. The room was nice. White walls, wide bed, a window that looked directly out at the pool, and, beyond it, the Atlantic. The kind of view that made you briefly forget about tent-pole arguments and absent floors. She sat on the edge of the bed, looked at the water, and reminded herself, 14 days. That was all. Dinner that evening was large and loud in the way that family gatherings are large and loud, overlapping conversations, someone's child having opinions about pasta, Jenna's father telling a story about a boat that had been told, by Hazel's estimate, at least 4 times but was no less enthusiastically received for it. Hazel sat near the end of the table, ate well, laughed in the right places, and felt entirely comfortable on the surface and slightly watchful underneath. Declan sat across from her, and 2 seats down. He didn't say much. He didn't appear to need to. His mother addressed him with the careful brightness people use around someone who is going through something, and he answered in complete sentences that told you exactly what you asked, and nothing more. He ate everything on his plate. He refilled his water glass himself, rather than asking anyone to pass it. He laughed once, briefly, at something his father said, and it changed his face so completely and so quickly that Hazel looked away, feeling oddly like she'd seen something she wasn't supposed to. After dinner, he helped clear the table without being asked, which apparently surprised everyone except Hazel, who couldn't have said why. She was at the kitchen sink, also helping, also without being asked, also the kind of thing nobody particularly noticed when he came to stand beside her with a stack of plates. "You don't have to do that," he said, "neither do you." He set the plates down. She kept rinsing. After a moment, he picked up a dish towel and started drying without further comment, and they worked in a silence that was, Hazel realized after a while, not uncomfortable at all, which was, if she was being honest, the most surprising thing that had happened all day. The arrangement was Jenna's idea in the sense that most quiet disasters are someone's idea, well-intentioned, poorly thought through, and somehow already in motion before the other person fully understands what they've agreed to. It started at breakfast, day 3. Hazel was at the table with her laptop and her coffee, and her actual work. The East Hampton plans open across 2 windows, a site survey pulled up on her phone. She had achieved a solid hour and a half of focused progress before the family began arriving in waves. First Jenna's father with his newspaper, then both aunts with competing opinions about the jam selection, then 3 cousins demanding the Wi-Fi password simultaneously. Declan came in last, poured himself coffee, and sat at the far end of the table with his own laptop. He hadn't asked for the Wi-Fi password. He'd apparently already figured it out, which Hazel found more respectable than she expected to. They had been working in parallel silence for 20 minutes when Jenna appeared in the doorway and made a sound, not the delighted sound from before. A different one. Slightly apprehensive. So, she said. "Mum's been talking to the aldermans." Hazel looked up. Declan did not. The aldermans, he said flatly. "They're joining the reunion. Just for a few days." A beat. "Victoria is coming." The kitchen went quiet in the specific way that kitchens go quiet when something has been said that everyone already knew was coming but nobody wanted to arrive. Hazel looked at Jenna. Jenna looked at her brother. Her brother closed his laptop with the careful precision of someone who is very tired and is choosing, consciously, not to throw at Declan. Jenna started. "It's fine, she's going to..." "It's fine, Jenna." He picked up his coffee and walked out through the back door. The screen door closed quietly behind him. Jenna turned to Hazel with an expression that said, "You see what I'm working with." Hazel had, in fact, seen, and she was also now doing the mental work of remembering everything Jenna had ever told her about Victoria Alderman, which was, she and Declan had dated for nearly 4 years. She had ended it in the cleanest way possible by announcing it at a dinner party in front of mutual friends and their respective families, and she had spent the 18 months since apparently reconsidering that decision and making it known. She was beautiful, rich, and effortlessly at home in any room she entered. Hazel knew the type. She was not the type. He hates the idea of her seeing him like this, Jenna said quietly, once his footsteps had faded. He sold the company because he wanted to. He knows what he's doing next. But right now, he looks like someone who lost everything, and she's exactly the kind of person who would find that useful. Hazel absorbed this. What does that have to do with me? She asked, because she had learned, over 6 years of friendship with Jenna, to ask this question before Jenna had a chance to answer it voluntarily. Jenna pulled out a chair, sat down, and folded her hands on the table. I have a small idea. The small idea was this. If Victoria arrived to find Declan visibly, convincingly happy, occupied, engaged, interested in someone, she would have very little to work with. And if that someone happened to already be living in the same pool house, already eating dinner at the same table, already known to the family, it would be even more convincing. You want us to pretend to be together, Hazel said. I want you to pretend to enjoy each other's company, which, from what I've observed in this kitchen for the past 3 days, is not a significant departure from reality. Jenna, he won't ask you himself. He's too proud. But he needs this, Hazel. Just for 4 days. Until she leaves. Hazel closed her laptop. She looked out the window at the pool, at the water beyond it, at Declan standing at the far edge of the garden with his coffee, his back to the house, the kind of stillness around him that looked less like peace and more like armor. Stop saying yes when you mean no, said the note at the top of her list. But she didn't mean no. That was the problem. She looked at him, and she didn't mean no, and she didn't entirely understand why, and that was its own kind of problem. She found him at the garden's edge 20 minutes later. He heard her coming. She wasn't quiet on the gravel path, but he didn't turn until she was standing beside him. Jenna talk to you, he said. Jenna talk to me. He looked at the water. You don't have to. I know. I'm not asking. I know that too. A pause. The sea was gray-green and close enough that she could hear it, that low, constant pull that beaches do. Like the world slowly breathing. 4 days, she said. Until Victoria leaves. We're friendly. We're together. We don't have to manufacture anything dramatic. I'm not going to gaze at you across the dinner table. We just don't correct people if they assume. He was quiet for a moment. Then, you're very practical about this. One of us should be. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. Something earlier than a smile. More tentative. Why are you doing this? She considered giving him a simple answer. She had several ready. Instead, she said, because you helped clear the table, and nobody does that unless they were raised right or they're trying very hard to be decent. And I think you're both. He looked at her then. Really looked. The way he hadn't on any of the 3 previous occasions she'd met him, the way she suspected he didn't often look at people, or let himself. It lasted only a second. Then, he looked back at the water. 4 days. He said. 4 days, she agreed. Neither of them moved. The sea kept breathing, and somewhere between the gravel and the gray-green water, something shifted that neither of them named, but both of them felt. Victoria Alderman arrived on a Thursday afternoon in a white car that somehow looked custom. Hazel watched from the pool house window, because she was not above watching from a window, and she noted, tall, honey blonde, the kind of effortless elegance that is partially genetic and partially the result of very expensive habits. She embraced Jenna's mother warmly, said something that made everyone laugh, and then looked toward the pool house with a single clean glance that took in everything and revealed nothing. Hazel stepped back from the window. She's good, she said to no one in particular. Declan appeared from the kitchen with 2 glasses of water and set one beside her laptop, without comment. She looked at him. He looked at the window. She's very good, he agreed. That was how it started. The performance, such as it was, turned out to require almost no performance at all. They had dinner on the back terrace, all of them together. Citronella candles and good wine, and that particular ease that descends on large family gatherings by day 3 or 4, when everyone has stopped being on best behavior. Hazel sat beside Declan. He kept his arm along the back of her chair, which she had not anticipated, and which she refused to let herself think too hard about. It was practical. It was prop work. Fine Victoria sat across from them and smiled throughout dinner with the warmth of a woman who is gathering information very efficiently. Afterward, in the kitchen, their kitchen, by now, the small shared competence of two people who have learned each other's rhythms in a shared space, Declan leaned against the counter and said, she asked Jenna how long. What did Jenna say? A few months. She was vague. Which means Victoria will find a way to ask you directly. Then, I'll be vague too. Hazel stacked the last of the glasses. I'm good at vague. Are you? I've been vague about my feelings about most things for years. It's basically a skill at this point. He watched her say it. She hadn't meant it to land as anything. It was a half joke, the kind she deployed reflexively to deflect anything too honest, but it landed anyway, in the silence between them, and she saw from the slight change in his expression that he'd caught it. What? Is that what the list is for? He asked. She turned to look at him. You saw my list? You left your phone on the table this morning. I wasn't reading it. I saw the first line. She waited. Stop saying yes when you mean no, he said quietly. She didn't say anything. The kitchen felt smaller than it had a moment ago. I have one too, he said. Not a list, but something like it. He was looking at his water glass. Mine is more like, figure out what you actually want, and then stop being afraid of it. I've been writing it in my head for about 3 years. It was the first real thing he'd told her. Not a practical fact, not a competence. Something interior. Something that cost him something to say. She could feel that it did. He wasn't looking at her. Did selling the company have anything to do with that? She asked. A pause. Everything to do with it. She nodded slowly. Didn't push. He seemed to appreciate that more than any response she could have given. The days fell into an easy shape after that, which was the unexpected part. She worked in the mornings. He worked in the mornings. They ran into each other at the coffee machine and negotiated it with the wordless choreography of people who have somehow, without discussing it, learned how the other one moves in a space. In the afternoons, there were family things, walks, boat trips, a catastrophically competitive croquet match that Hazel nearly won before being nobly defeated by one of the aunts, which gave Declan more visible amusement than she'd seen from him in a week. You were robbed, he said, as they walked back from the lawn. She hip-checked me. On a croquet lawn. Is that legal? Absolutely not. Someone should say something. She's 74. Nobody's going to say anything. She laughed, and he laughed, and it was unguarded and easy, and briefly, just briefly, she forgot entirely that it was supposed to be pretend. The almost moment happened on the 4th day, evening, just before Victoria was due to leave. They'd been on the back porch, the sun setting over the water, the two of them sitting close on the porch swing, because that was what the situation called for, because Victoria was 20 feet away having a drink with Jenna's parents. His arm was around her shoulders, which by now had stopped feeling like prop work and started feeling like something she was going to miss. She was looking at the sunset. He was looking at her. She turned to find him already watching. The distance between them was small. The porch swing swayed, just slightly, and he put his free hand on the chain to still it, and in doing that he ended up closer, his jaw near her temple, both of them very still. Hazel, he said quietly. Not a question. Her name, like a conclusion he hadn't finished drawing yet. She turned her head. just slightly. He was right there. The screen door opened behind them. Declan, your mother wants a photo, Jenna called. He pulled back. Not fast, carefully, like something fragile was being set down. He stood up, looked at her for 1 second, the expression on his face complicated and unresolved, and then walked inside. Hazel let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She sat on the porch swing alone for a long time after that, watching the water go dark. Victoria did not leave on Thursday. She had apparently a headache. Then there was weather. Then there was a cousin's dinner that turned, through some social alchemy Hazel couldn't trace, into a beach bonfire that simply couldn't be missed. By Saturday, she had been there 6 days and shown no signs of any departure, and Hazel had started finding reasons to work at the far end of the pool rather than the kitchen table, which was not about Victoria specifically, she told herself, but was absolutely about Victoria specifically. The bonfire was Jenna's idea, which was becoming a pattern. It was a good night for it. Warm, starry, the kind of June evening that makes you briefly believe summer will last forever. Someone had carried speakers down to the beach. There was wine and food, and that specific loose happiness that fire brings out in people. Hazel sat on a blanket near the water's edge, talking to one of the cousins, Marcus, who was 26 and doing a doctorate in marine biology, and was, genuinely, wonderful company. They'd been talking for nearly an hour about tidal patterns and load-bearing structures, which was more overlap than she'd expected, and she was laughing at something he'd said about wave refraction when she became aware that someone was looking at her. She glanced up. Declan, across the fire. He was holding a drink he hadn't touched in 15 minutes. He was looking at Marcus. It was not a friendly look. It wasn't angry exactly. It was evaluating. The way a person looks at something they've decided they don't want to be near what they're looking at. Still and flat, and very focused. Marcus was saying something about currents. Hazel was no longer fully hearing it. Victoria appeared at Declan's elbow. Flawless timing. That woman had flawless timing, and touched his arm, and said something close to his ear, and Declan turned to look at her with the kind of polite blankness that is actually impenetrably closed. But he didn't move away. Victoria's hand stayed on his arm. Hazel looked back at Marcus and said something. She couldn't have told you what, and Marcus laughed. And in her peripheral vision, she saw Declan set his drink down in the sand. She only realized he'd moved when his voice came from immediately behind her. Hazel. Low. Even. She turned. He was standing just outside the firelight, hands in his pockets, looking at Marcus with an expression that had enough visible tension in it that Marcus blinked and looked between them. Hey, Hazel said. Her voice was perfectly steady. Marcus was just telling me about. I know. He looked at her. Can I talk to you for a minute? Marcus excused himself with the graceful instinct of someone who has correctly read a room, and then it was just the two of them, slightly back from the fire, the sound of the ocean behind them, and the bonfire crowd ahead. You don't have to do that, she said, keeping her voice light. Marcus is just... I know what Marcus is, Declan said. He's harmless. I know that. Then what? I didn't like it, he said. It was so direct that it stopped her completely. No deflection, no framing, just that. Flat and plain. I didn't like it. She stared at him. You didn't like what, exactly? His jaw shifted. Watching you laugh with someone else for an hour. The fire crackled. Somewhere behind them, someone dropped something and someone else laughed. The whole ordinary night carrying on around a moment that felt anything but ordinary. Declan, she said carefully. We agreed. I know what we agreed. 4 days. That's done. Victoria's still here, but this isn't about Victoria. His voice was quiet. Not loud, not dramatic, just certain. It stopped being about Victoria 3 days ago. You know that. She did know that. That was the problem. You're not being fair, she said. I'm aware. You can't just. She stopped. Started again. You can't look at me like that across a fire and then come over here and say it's not about the arrangement and expect me to. I'm not expecting anything. He took a step closer. Just one, careful, deliberate the way he did everything. I just needed you to know. I needed to say it to your face instead of sitting across a fire watching someone else make you laugh. She looked up at him. This close, in the low orange light, she could see everything she'd been not quite looking at all week. The tired honesty behind his eyes, the slight involuntary tension in his expression that meant he hadn't planned this, that this was not Declan Whitmore being strategic, but Declan Whitmore failing, for the first time in a long time, to stop himself. I've been alone for a long time, he said. I'm not saying that for sympathy. I chose most of it. I thought choosing it was the same as being fine with it. But then you showed up in my kitchen and worked in silence and were decent about it, and I'm not fine with it, Hazel. I haven't been fine with it for a while, and you made that very difficult to keep ignoring. She needed to say something. She had a reasonable, measured, protective response fully formed. She could feel it there, ready, the kind of thing that would keep her exactly where she had always kept herself, capable and fine and needing no one. Instead, she said, "That was the most honest thing anyone has said to me in 2 years." He looked at her. "And that terrifies me," she added. For the record, the corner of his mouth moved, barely. Noted, they stood there, close in the firelight, the waves behind them. Neither moved toward the other. Neither moved away. It was Victoria who ended it, appearing from around the bonfire with a clean, bright smile that found them standing together and did not change, not even by a millimeter, which was somehow the most unsettling thing she'd done all week. "There you both are," she said. And something about the way she said both, proprietary, unbothered, confident, made Hazel understand, with sudden clarity, that Victoria had never once believed the arrangement was real, and had come anyway. The morning after the bonfire, Hazel got up at 6 and went to the beach alone. She needed the kind of thinking that required movement, head down, feet in the sand, the horizon doing that reliable thing it does where it makes all the small, urgent things seem slightly less urgent. She had her phone in her pocket. She hadn't opened it. She was doing very well. Declan had walked her back to the pool house last night. They hadn't talked much. He'd said goodnight at the door, not come in. She'd stood in her room afterward and looked at the ceiling for longer than she would admit. I've been alone for a long time. Like he was diagnosing something. Like he'd been waiting to name it. She understood that. She understood it in a way that she'd rather not have. She turned back toward the house at 7:30 and found Jenna sitting on the pool house steps with 2 mugs of coffee, wearing sunglasses and an expression of studied innocence. "You were up early," Jenna said. "So were you. I heard you leave." She held out a mug. Hazel sat down and took it. They looked at the pool for a moment. The water was very still. "He really likes you," Jenna said. "In case that wasn't obvious, Jenna, I'm just stating a fact. I've known him for 32 years. He doesn't do what he did last night. He doesn't say things like that. He doesn't say most things. He used to be different, before everything with Victoria, but since then he just works, and goes quiet, and works more. And you've been here for 9 days and he's laughing again." Hazel looked at her coffee. Why did she come? She asked. Jenna was quiet for a moment. Because she heard he'd sold the company, and I think she thought, he'd be looking for stability. Something familiar. A pause. She doesn't understand him at all, actually. She never did. She liked the version of him that was easiest to handle. Hazel thought about this. She thought about Declan standing at the garden's edge, his back to the house, the stillness that wasn't peace. She thought about the way he'd said I chose most of it, the half-admission in it, the awareness. It was fake, she said. We should remember that. Was it? She looked at Jenna. When you two are in a room, Jenna said, Every other conversation slows down. That's not fake. That's just what happens. Hazel finished her coffee and said she needed to work. She did try to work. She made meaningful progress on the East Hampton drawings, actually, a solid hour and a half. The good kind of focus where the problems are interesting and solvable. She was deep in a site measurement discrepancy when the pool house door opened, and she heard, from the kitchen, Victoria's voice, clear and warm and fully conversational, not asking for anything. She'd simply walked in. She was speaking to Declan, who was at the counter. Hazel stayed at her table, headphones on one ear, pretending. "I think we should talk," Victoria said. "Properly. About what happened. Silence. We talked," Declan said. "You got very quiet, and I called that talking. That's not the same thing. Another silence. Longer." Hazel was extremely interested in her site survey. Victoria. "You sold the company. You're here. You seem," a pause, searching, lighter. "Which is new, and I'm happy for you. I genuinely am." Her voice shifted slightly. "I was wrong about how I ended things. I think I was afraid of how serious it had gotten, and I handled it badly. I'm telling you that directly, because you deserve that." Hazel set her pencil down very quietly. "I appreciate that," Declan said. His tone was even. Not cold, just resolved. "I mean that. But, I'm not where you are. A pause. Because of Hazel. Not entirely." A beat. Then, partly. Hazel did not move. She's not your type," Victoria said, and she made it sound almost gentle, which was the sharpest version of it. "She's quiet and she works all the time and I don't know her. Declan, I just mean she seems very different from what you need." "I know," he said then. "She's different from what I thought I needed." His voice was quiet. "It turns out those are not the same thing." A long silence. Then, the sound of Victoria setting something down on the counter, and then her footsteps. And then the door. Hazel sat very still. After a moment, Declan's footsteps crossed the kitchen. She heard him pause at the edge of the room. She knew he'd see her sitting there. She pulled off her headphone properly and turned around. He was leaning in the doorway, arms crossed, with an expression that said he knew exactly what she'd just heard and was not going to perform embarrassment about it. "Sorry," he said. "You didn't know I was here. I should have checked." She looked at him. He looked at her. Something was different, not just from this morning, but from before the bonfire, before the arrangement, from the first moment in the entryway when she'd walked into him and he'd caught her before she fell. She should say something reasonable. She should say, "That was a private conversation, let's not make it strange. We're doing well, and let's not complicate it." She had the words ready. Instead, what came out was, "She said I'm not your type." She did. Is she right? He looked at her for a long moment, long enough that she started to wish she hadn't asked. "No," he said. And then, his phone rang, his lawyer, from the ringtone, which he always answered because he was still in the middle of the company sale paperwork, and he answered it, and walked back into the kitchen, and Hazel turned around in her chair and stared at her site survey, without seeing any of it. The pool house felt very full of something it hadn't been full of before. Victoria left on Sunday morning. She said goodbye with grace, brief hugs, a warm word for everyone. A look at Declan that was readable even from across the driveway, even by Hazel, who was standing at the pool house window again and was starting to feel like this was simply where she lived now. The look said, "I tried. I understand. Good luck," which was, Hazel had to admit, better than most exits the white car pulled out. Jenna immediately caught Hazel's eye from across the garden with an expression that said, "Now what?" Now what indeed. The next 2 days were strange. Not bad, just suspended, like the particular quiet that follows something large. Victoria being there had given the arrangement a shape. Without her, the shape was gone, and what remained was just two people living in a pool house who had said several very honest things to each other and had no particular reason to do anything about them. Declan worked more. Not avoidance, or not only avoidance, he had actual things to manage. The sale still had paperwork. There were calls. There were decisions about what came next professionally, which he apparently hadn't fully decided. She knew this because she heard fragments, not intentionally, just the way you hear things in a shared space. She worked too. The East Hampton project was in a good phase, the kind where the ideas are happening faster than the drawings, which was always exciting and slightly overwhelming. On Tuesday afternoon, she was at the kitchen table, sketching by hand because sometimes that was still better than CAD when she heard his call go wrong. She could tell from the shift in his voice, not volume, Declan never raised his voice, but the tempo changed, the evenness cracked slightly, and she heard in the pause between responses the specific kind of silence of someone being told something they didn't expect and can't immediately process. The call ended. A long pause. She kept sketching. They want to reverse a clause, he said from the other room, more to himself than to her, 12 weeks before closing. They're claiming material change. She didn't look up. Can they? Technically, if it holds in arbitration. It won't, but it could delay everything by 4 months. 4 months. She let that sit. Is that a real problem? Or just a frustrating problem? A pause. He appeared in the doorway. What's the difference? Real problem means it threatens something essential. Frustrating problem means it makes you feel like you've lost something you haven't actually lost yet. She looked up. Which is it? He looked at her for a moment. Then, slowly, he sat down at the kitchen table. Across from her, not next to her, across, with the full width of the table between them, like a formal meeting, except that he looked like someone who had not slept enough and had not admitted it. Frustrating, he said. But it feels real right now. She nodded. Went back to her sketch, let the silence sit. My father built a business from nothing, Declan said after a while. Sold it. Started another one. Sold that. Never seemed like a man who spent any time questioning whether he was doing the right thing. Did you ever ask him? No. Maybe he was better at hiding it. Maybe. He looked at his hands. I spent 12 years building something I was proud of. I woke up one morning and I wasn't proud of it anymore. I mean, it was successful. It worked. But I had become someone who was good at a thing he no longer wanted to be good at. And I didn't know who else I was. She stopped sketching. Selling it felt like the right decision for about 2 weeks, he continued. Then, it felt like I'd erased 12 years of myself. Then Victoria arrived, and she looked at me like I was a wounded version of someone she used to prefer. And he stopped. Looked at the table. I think I've been useful for so long that I don't entirely know how to exist without an objective. She looked at him. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the middle distance past her shoulder, which was, she'd come to understand, where he looked when he was saying something real. What would you do, she asked, if being useful wasn't on the table? If you just had to do something for the pure reason of wanting to? A long pause. I'd read more. I'd be somewhere like this, probably. He stopped. When he looked at her again, there was something in his eyes she hadn't seen there before. Not sadness exactly, but the vulnerability that lives just behind it. I'd try to deserve the kind of thing I seem to keep finding myself wanting and then deciding I'm not, that it's not a good time, or I'm not ready, or the situation is too. He stopped himself. Hazel felt the specific, painful clarity of knowing that she was the end of that sentence, and that he had just chosen not to say it. Declan, she said. I know. He stood up, straightening. The wall was back. Not hard, not cold, just there, the way it always came back, the practiced reflex. I know. The arrangement is done. You've been more than fair about all of this. I won't make it awkward. You're not making it. I am. A little. He almost smiled. I need to make some calls. The arbitration thing. He went back into his room. The door closed. Not sharply, just closed. She sat at the kitchen table and looked at her sketch, which she had stopped being able to see, and felt the hollow, specific loneliness of someone who has been offered something they want and has not yet been brave enough to reach for it. She was very, very tired of not reaching for things. He started leaving things. Not dramatically, not in a way that announced itself. A coffee at the exact moment she surfaced at the kitchen table every morning. A spare phone charger beside her laptop when hers died. She hadn't asked, she hadn't mentioned it, he'd simply noticed. Once, a printout of a structural engineering article about a new composite material that had been making noise in residential architecture, left on her sketchpad with no note. She mentioned the article at dinner, and he said he'd come across it and thought it was relevant. His mother glanced between them, and then very deliberately helped herself to more bread. He was not performing anything. That was the thing. He wasn't grand gesturing, there were no flowers, no speeches, no dramatic arrivals. He was just being consistent in the small, daily, entirely visible way of someone who has decided, quietly, to try. She noticed all of it. She was pretending she didn't, and she suspected he knew she was pretending, and she suspected he was going to let her have that, because he had learned, in whatever way you learn these things, that she needed to come to it herself or not at all. But she was cracking. She could feel it. Wednesday night. They'd been sitting on the porch after dinner, not unusual now. It had become a thing, a natural end-of-evening thing. The rest of the family inside, and the two of them on the swing with the last light going. He'd read. She'd had her sketchpad. Normal. Quiet. Good. I want to ask you something, she said, and I need you to answer honestly. He lowered his book. All right. Do you know what you want to do next, professionally? Do you actually have a plan, or is it still open? He looked at the water. It's still open. I have a few ideas that are half-formed. One that's more formed than that. Tell me. A pause, like he was deciding how much to give. Then there's a community development fund I've been watching for 3 years. Affordable housing projects in 4 cities. They're undercapitalized. Not badly, but enough that good architects can't get involved because the margins are too thin. If I come in as a capital partner, set up a proper structure, they get the funding, I get the work. She stared at him. You're going to fund affordable housing projects, she said. I'm going to fund the funding for affordable housing projects, which is different and more boring, but has better structural, Declan. She was smiling and she couldn't stop it. That's actually wonderful. He looked slightly uncomfortable, which she found completely charming. It makes financial sense. Oh, it definitely makes financial sense. Is that why you're doing it? A pause. Not entirely, he admitted. She laughed. Not at him, the warm kind. And he looked at her for a moment with an expression she would have paid significant money to photograph. You should talk to my firm, she said. Actually, we've been trying to break into community development work, but the financial side it's always the barrier. If you're setting up that kind of structure. I know, he said. She stopped. What? I looked up your firm. 6 months ago. You'd just been listed in an Architectural Digest piece about emerging residential designers. He looked at his book. I was going to. He stopped, smiled, slightly ruefully. And then Jenna told me you were coming to the Hamptons and I thought I'd see if it. He stopped again. She stared at him. You looked up my firm. Yes. Before any of this. Yes. Declan Whitmore. I know. You have been. She shook her head. How long have you known who I was? Like, actually known, not just Jenna's friend. He looked at the ceiling of the porch, briefly, like a man reviewing his choices, since the Architectural Digest piece. Which was, I want to point out, public information. That was 8 months ago. I'm aware. She absorbed this. The porch swing moved slightly. The stars were very bright. What were you going to do? she asked. Before the Hamptons. Were you actually going to? I hadn't decided, he said. I'm slow about some things. She looked at him. He looked back, and the small, familiar distance between them on the swing had been getting smaller. She realized, incrementally, naturally, the way things close when nobody's looking, until she was close enough to see the particular warmth in his eyes that was only there when he looked at her and nowhere else. This was where she would normally pull back. She didn't pull back. Twist, she said. Quietly. He frowned. Slightly. What? That's what this is, isn't it? You've been this whole time, you... She laughed again. Softer. Jenna knew. Jenna absolutely knew. He agreed. And then his phone lit up on the armrest and he looked at it. And his expression changed. The warm, close thing replaced with something sharper and more strained. The arbitration, he said. She looked at the name on the screen. Not his lawyer. Another name. One she didn't recognize. It's my lead investor, he said. He wasn't looking at her anymore. He's been making noise about the reversal clause. If he's calling at 9 at night, it's not good news. He stood up. She stayed on the swing. He answered the call before he'd fully stepped off the porch, and she heard, in the first 30 seconds, that whatever was coming was larger than a delay, that this was the kind of call that meant everything he'd been building toward, carefully, quietly, for the past 6 weeks, was now. Significantly less certain, by the time she went inside, his light was still on. It was on when she woke up at 2. Still on at 3:30. She fell asleep to the narrow line of light under his door and felt, with a certainty that had nothing to do with logic, that she was not going anywhere. He started leaving things. Not dramatically, not in a way that announced itself. A coffee at the exact moment she surfaced at the kitchen table every morning. A spare phone charger beside her laptop when hers died. She hadn't asked, she hadn't mentioned it, he'd simply noticed. Once, a printout of a structural engineering article about a new composite material that had been making noise in residential architecture, left on her sketchpad with no note. She mentioned the article at dinner, and he said he'd come across it and thought it was relevant. His mother glanced between them, and then very deliberately helped herself to more bread. He was not performing anything. That was the thing. He wasn't grand gesturing, there were no flowers, no speeches, no dramatic arrivals. He was just being consistent in the small, daily, entirely visible way of someone who has decided, quietly, to try. She noticed all of it. She was pretending she didn't, and she suspected he knew she was pretending, and she suspected he was going to let her have that, because he had learned, in whatever way you learn these things, that she needed to come to it herself or not at all. But she was cracking. She could feel it. Wednesday night. They'd been sitting on the porch after dinner, not unusual now. It had become a thing, a natural end-of-evening thing. The rest of the family inside, and the two of them on the swing with the last light going. He'd read. She'd had her sketchpad. Normal. Quiet. Good. I want to ask you something, she said, and I need you to answer honestly. He lowered his book. All right. Do you know what you want to do next, professionally? Do you actually have a plan, or is it still open? He looked at the water. It's still open. I have a few ideas that are half-formed. One that's more formed than that. Tell me. A pause, like he was deciding how much to give. Then there's a community development fund I've been watching for 3 years. Affordable housing projects in 4 cities. They're undercapitalized. Not badly, but enough that good architects can't get involved because the margins are too thin. If I come in as a capital partner, set up a proper structure, they get the funding, I get the work. She stared at him. You're going to fund affordable housing projects, she said. I'm going to fund the funding for affordable housing projects, which is different and more boring, but has better structural, Declan. She was smiling and she couldn't stop it. That's actually wonderful. He looked slightly uncomfortable, which she found completely charming. It makes financial sense. Oh, it definitely makes financial sense. Is that why you're doing it? A pause. Not entirely, he admitted. She laughed, not at him, the warm kind, and he looked at her for a moment with an expression she would have paid significant money to photograph. You should talk to my firm, she said. Actually, we've been trying to break into community development work, but the financial side it's always the barrier. If you're setting up that kind of structure. I know, he said. She stopped. What? I looked up your firm. 6 months ago. You'd just been listed in an Architectural Digest piece about emerging residential designers. He looked at his book. I was going to. He stopped, smiled, slightly ruefully. And then Jenna told me you were coming to the Hamptons and I thought I'd see if it. He stopped again. She stared at him. You looked up my firm. Yes. Before any of this. Yes. Declan Whitmore. I know. You have been. She shook her head. How long have you known who I was? Like, actually known, not just Jenna's friend. He looked at the ceiling of the porch, briefly, like a man reviewing his choices, since the Architectural Digest piece. Which was, I want to point out, public information. That was 8 months ago. I'm aware. She absorbed this. The porch swing moved slightly. The stars were very bright. What were you going to do? She asked. Before the Hamptons. Were you actually going to? I hadn't decided, he said. I'm slow about some things. She looked at him. He looked back, and the small, familiar distance between them on the swing had been getting smaller. She realized, incrementally, naturally, the way things close when nobody's looking, until she was close enough to see the particular warmth in his eyes that was only there when he looked at her and nowhere else. This was where she would normally pull back. She didn't pull back. Twist, she said. Quietly. He frowned. Slightly. What? That's what this is, isn't it? You've been this whole time, you. She laughed again. Softer. Jenna knew. Jenna absolutely knew. He agreed. And then his phone lit up on the armrest and he looked at it. And his expression changed. The warm, close thing replaced with something sharper and more strained. The arbitration, he said. She looked at the name on the screen. Not his lawyer. Another name. One she didn't recognize. It's my lead investor, he said. He wasn't looking at her anymore. He's been making noise about the reversal clause. If he's calling at 9 at night, it's not good news. He stood up. She stayed on the swing. He answered the call before he'd fully stepped off the porch, and she heard, in the first 30 seconds, that whatever was coming was larger than a delay, that this was the kind of call that meant everything he'd been building toward, carefully, quietly, for the past 6 weeks, was now. Significantly less certain, by the time she went inside, his light was still on. It was on when she woke up at 2. Still on at 3:30. She fell asleep to the narrow line of light under his door and felt, with a certainty that had nothing to do with logic, that she was not going anywhere. He made 9 calls on Thursday. She knew this because she counted, not deliberately, but the pool house had modest walls and she was working at the kitchen table and the day had a rhythm to it. Each call slightly different in tone, each one building towards something. By the 5th call, she had stopped pretending she couldn't hear. By the 7th, she had quietly made him a second coffee and left it where he'd find it. By the 9th, which lasted 40 minutes and ended with a long silence and then a single yes done, she let out a breath she'd been holding all day. He came out of his room at 6 in the evening, looking like a man who had spent 9 hours in combat and had won on points but didn't want to discuss it. He picked up the coffee, found it cold, and made a small sound. There's fresh, she said. He looked at the countertop. There was. He poured a mug, turned around, and leaned against the counter. Gareth Cole has a competing bid, he said. From a fund out of Austin. Better terms than his reversal play. His lawyers will push back. They will definitely push back. But the leverage is gone. She kept her expression even. And the housing fund? The corner of his mouth moved. Operational. On the new structure. First project breaks ground in Baltimore in November. She looked at him. He looked at her. Then, she stood up from the kitchen table, which she would later recognize as the moment she stopped managing the distance between them and started closing it. She crossed the kitchen. 6 steps. The actual distance was 6 steps she had been not taking for 11 days. And stopped in front of him. That, she said, is the right outcome. He was looking at her with the same expression he'd had on the porch 4 nights ago, before the screen door opened. Resolved, undone, careful, done being careful. I told you about the dinner, he said. I remember. I want to do that. I want to do. He stopped. Set the coffee mug down. I want to do all of it. The dinner, and the work conversation, and the one where I ask you if you want to see how this goes when we're in the city, and not in a borrowed pool house pretending to be something we— He stopped again. Something we turned into. She said. Yes. She looked up at him. This close. She had to. He reached up and touched her face, one hand, his thumb at her cheekbone, slow and entirely certain. The way everything he did was certain when he'd decided. She didn't move. She didn't want to move. He was watching his own hand, briefly, and then he looked at her. Really looked. The full-on version of it. The one he'd been half doing and redirecting for days. You have no idea, he said quietly, what it was like to watch you walk into my kitchen and immediately start helping and make no comment about it and just be there. I was just— I know. That's what I mean. She brought her hand up over his, the one at her cheekbone. Held it there. The morning, she said. After the first night, when I woke up, and you were already awake, and you were just looking at me. You didn't say anything. You didn't move. How long had you been awake? He was quiet for a moment. A while. Were you going to say anything? I was trying to decide. And? His thumb moved, the softest, most deliberate thing. I decided I'd let you wake up first, and see what you did. What did I do? You looked at me like you were trying to solve a problem, he said. And then you looked almost like you'd solved it. And then you pulled back. And I thought, I'll wait. She'll get there. She felt the laugh before it came. Helpless, warm, the kind that comes from being seen and not minding it. You were patient about it, she said. I am occasionally patient. That's a very short list. You're on it. She was laughing and he was close, and the kitchen was the same kitchen it had been all 2 weeks. The same coffee smell, the same pool view, the same narrow walls, and then it wasn't any of those things. It was just his arms around her, and her face against his shoulder, and the feeling of fitting into a space that had clearly been there the whole time, waiting. He held on, not careful, not managed, held, with the particular full-body relief of someone who has been making room for something for a long time and has finally allowed it in. Hazel, he said into her hair. I know, she said. I was going to be so patient about this. You lasted almost 2 weeks. That's actually very good for me. She was still laughing when he pressed his face against her temple, and then it wasn't laughing anymore, and his hand was at her jaw, and she turned her face up, and they were in the kitchen with the Atlantic 20 yards away and 2 weeks of managed distance finally, completely done. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a grand declaration with weather and witnesses. It was just honest, and warm, and exactly long enough, and when they finally separated, they were both still standing in the same kitchen, with the same coffee going cold on the counter, and neither of them seemed to mind at all. Friday dinner, she said. Friday dinner, he agreed. And then, Saturday. What's Saturday? We'll figure it out. She looked at him. He looked at her. Biscuit the golden retriever scratched at the screen door, and they both looked at the door. He always does that, she said. Every time. He agreed. She opened the door for the dog. Declan picked up his coffee. The evening came in off the water, salt-sweet, and the pool turned gold in the last light, and somewhere in the main house Jenna was probably adding this scene to a very satisfied internal narrative. Hazel figured she'd earned it. The last morning. 14 days as agreed. The cars would come at noon. Hazel woke early, earlier than usual, before 6, the sky still doing the thing it does over the Atlantic where pink and gray argue with each other until blue wins. She lay still for a moment. Listened to the birds. Listened to the water. The pool house was quiet. His door was open, which was new. She got up, went to the kitchen, made coffee, was standing at the counter, watching the pool go from gray to gold when she heard him come out. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, looked at her, looked at the coffee, looked at the window. "You make it better than I do," he said. "You make it too strong. Coffee should be too strong. Coffee should be drinkable." He took the mug she offered and stood beside her at the counter, both of them looking out at the morning. This was, she realized, the thing she would carry most clearly. Not the bonfire or the porch or even the kitchen 6 days ago. This. The very ordinary mornings. The two of them knowing exactly how the other one stood in a room. "I've been thinking," she said. "Good thoughts? Or organizing your exit strategy thoughts?" She smiled at the window. "Good ones." She looked at him. "The housing fund. The Baltimore project. I want to put in a formal pitch. From the firm." He looked at her steadily. "That's a business conversation. It's also a personal one, and I'm choosing to lead with the business part because I'm more comfortable there." "I know," he said. "What's the personal part?" She looked at her coffee. "I'm very good at being fine," she said, "at handling things, not needing much, being the capable one. I've been that person for so long I think I forgot it was a choice. And somewhere around, I think it was the croquet lawn actually, I realized I wasn't doing it anymore. I was just." She paused. "Just here." He watched her. Said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. "And I want to keep being just here," she said, "in whatever version of that makes sense outside of a pool house, with a golden retriever and 11 days of fake dating behind us. 12 days, he said. The last day is today. The last day of the original arrangement, he said. Which I'd like to renegotiate, for the record. She looked at him. New terms, he said. No fixed end date. No pretending required. You still tell me when I'm too patient and I still leave you architecture journals you've already read, and we figure out the rest when we get there. That's a very vague contract. I'm comfortable with vague. You are not comfortable with vague. I'm learning. He reached out, the same gesture as before, slow and certain. His hand at her jaw, his thumb just below her cheekbone. She leaned into it slightly, before she decided to, and felt him notice. The list on your phone, he said. Item 1. She looked at him. Saying yes when you mean no, he said. So, do you mean no? She held his gaze. No, she said. I don't mean no. He exhaled, quietly, just once, like something had been very slightly tightly wound and had finally been allowed to settle. She turned properly toward him, and he held her the same way he had in the kitchen 6 days ago, his arms around her and his face against her hair, and they stood there in the morning kitchen, with the coffee going warm between them and the water outside going gold. And she thought, this is the part nobody tells you about. Not the collision or the arrangement or the jealousy or the grand gesture, this. The morning after the morning after. The ordinary part. The part that lasts. She was going to be good at this, she thought. The ordinary part. The drive back to the city, he said. Are you going with Jenna? I was. Come with me instead. She looked up. I drive well, he said. And I'll let you control the music. And somewhere around New Haven, I'll probably tell you something else I've been sitting on, because apparently I do that. She laughed. Something else. There may be a list. He looked only marginally embarrassed. A shorter one than yours. What's on it? He looked out the window. Item 1. Stop letting useful be the only thing you are. She looked at him. He looked at her. The gold light came in through the kitchen window and landed on the counter, the coffee cups, his hands, her hands. We're a pair, she said. We are, he agreed. A fairly functional one. In the end, Biscuit scratched at the screen door. They both looked at it. Every time, she said. She opened the door. The dog came in and made directly for his water bowl. Hazel picked up her coffee. Declan's hand found the back of her chair, not possessive, just present, the way he'd had his arm along the chair at dinner 2 weeks ago, except that now it was simply true. Later, Jenna would hug her in the driveway with the specific grip of someone who had been right and was gracious enough not to say so out loud. Her mother would tell Declan he looked better. His father would nod once, which was, apparently, high praise. The car would pull out at noon, just as forecast. Hazel would connect her phone to the speakers, and Declan would look at her first song choice and say it was too early for that. And she would say it was never too early for that. And they would be somewhere on the highway talking about something completely different when she realized they were. Holding hands. Neither of them had noticed when it started. Neither of them let go.